They were not men from Mars.
No aliens?
Unfortunately, for some people. They were human and they were ahead of their time.
Did ancient Egyptians have a sense of humor?
Of course.
A wealth of texts will guide us through the thoughts and feelings of ancient Egyptians.
What we have is a fraction of what existed.
Meet Yasmine Shazli, the Egyptologist and Deputy Director for Research and Programs in the American Research Center in Egypt, who will take us on a dive into the world of literature in ancient Egypt.
It's better to write a book than build a tomb.
Did they rhyme?
They had rhyme and rhythm, they had puns.
You found homework sheets?
Yes, because you can see a lot of spelling mistakes.
When you go to the back door,
you learn about the people. People think of the ancient Egyptians as obsessed with death, but it's actually because they were so in love with life.
This is the oldest suicidal note found in history.
These human beings were very much like ourselves.
But with Scar Papyrus.
A story within a story.
It is quite advanced.
So Ra-Messi. The statue itself spells out the name of the king.
They played with structures to say the word without writing it.
People always say, do you speak hieroglyphs?
It's not spoken.
Hieroglyphs are like very sacred.
Like it's the advanced level.
Yeah.
You're not gonna start with that.
No, women can not write, so the palette was probably used for makeup, not for writing. Why are we assuming that she was not an actual scribe? When people were trying to decipher the script,
how would you know?
They give you clues. It's all one
line. No space. What can we today learn from the literature of ancient Egypt?
It teaches you empathy.
The core of wisdom.
Be a scribe.
What drew you into the world of literature?
My PhD dissertation was on royal ancestor worship in Deir el-Medina during the New Kingdom. Deir el-Medina is the village that housed the workmen who built and decorated the tombs in the Valley of the Kings and the Valley of the Queens. And it yielded so much information, so many literary texts, and all sorts of texts.
So it was not only houses and tombs they found in Deir el-Medina, they found texts.
Yes, they found a large amount of texts that give us so much information about the people who lived in Deir el-Medina and life in ancient Egypt in general.
So what can we categorize as literature? Because it's a broad term. Is it only the poetry and prose that we know that's being taught academically? Or can we consider the religious texts and the political texts and the propaganda and the songs, everything that ancient Egyptians wrote, can we consider it literature?
Yes and no. It's you cannot consider contracts and court cases literature. But
I'm curious to know about those.
Yes, but the term literature, when you apply to ancient Egyptian text, is a little broader than what we think of, as belles lettres. It's more. It includes religious texts because they're written with such skill and beauty that qualifies them as literary texts. Even some monumental inscriptions. Wisdom texts, which are texts that were written, are supposed to be from his father to his son, advising him on how to behave and that give you a lot of information about their moral values. These two are considered ancient Egyptian literature. Of course, stories, tales, love poetry, that's a category on its own. So it's a little broader than what we consider literature in our modern times.
Okay, so there were more categories than the categories that we know today or describe as literature.
It's actually we are the ones who applied the term literature to their writings.
Yes.
But when you read a book on ancient Egyptian literature, these are the categories that are included. You don't usually find medical texts or contracts in a book on ancient Egyptian literature.
Okay. I've always read about this literature of wisdom. Is it only the knowledge or the wisdom passed from one generation to another, from one father to their son, or is there a broader text that is directed from someone who is like a philosopher or a priest to the people?
No, it's broader because you have texts about the value of writing. There is a text that I love very much that's called The Immortality of Writers, and it really influenced me. And it's one of the texts why I love ancient Egyptian literature, because it talks about how writing a book is how you can achieve immortality, and that it's better to write a book than build a tomb. That the tomb is not as effective in ensuring your immortality as a book is. That is because the book is read by generations after you've passed away, and continues to influences people's thoughts, and your name continues to be repeated. And to the ancient Egyptians, the name was extremely important.
Oh, yes.
The worst thing you can do to anyone is erase their name after their death, because that means like they've never existed before. You've erased them from existence.
It's quite surprising that there is this idea that the word is your legacy, that you can survive through your writing. Because what we know of ancient Egyptians is that they had death at the back of their head all the time, and their target in life was to secure a safe journey towards death and after.
Yes, people think of the ancient Egyptians as people who were obsessed with death, but it's actually because they were so in love with life that they tried to ensure that after their death, their life would continue the way it was in this life.
Was literature in any way a form of entertainment, as we read novels today to pass the time?
Yes, of course, because there are many tales that were written that were probably for entertainment. But the problem is that we've lost so much because a lot of it was probably an oral tradition that was not recorded. What we have is the literature that was discovered in writing. And we have lost a lot through the years. So what we have is not necessarily representative of everything that existed in ancient Egypt. For example, in the New Kingdom, we have love poetry or love songs, because we don't know if they were sung or not. They probably were.
Did they rhyme? Did they have rhyme and rhythm?
Yes, in ancient Egypt, they had rhyme and rhythm. They had puns. And a lot of this is lost when you translate them.
Yeah.
And unfortunately.
So I was going to ask you, how can we get the sense of this literature? I mean, it has to do with music. It has to do with your ability to use the words, to play on the words. How can you get it when you translate?
It's unfortunately, good translators can try to capture some of it, but unfortunately, most of the translations are in English or French or German. And it's more difficult to translate ancient Egyptian into these Western languages, because ancient Egyptian is an Afro-Asiatic language related to
Roots.
Semitic languages. So it's closer to Arabic than it is to Western languages.
They have the ha, the kha,
Yes.
the ain.
Yeah. And
Right.
and also there are scholars like Professor Faiza Heikel, for example, who is who has done a lot of research on ancient Egyptian texts and elements that have survived into our modern colloquial Egyptian Arabic. For example, the word for crocodile is mesah. In Arabic, it's timsah.
So it's from the same root.
Yes. The word for woman is sit. Like
Which
Egyptian
is
Arabic.
What Egyptians
Yes.
say about a woman.
Yes,
Sit.
sit.
Until
So there are
today.
many, many, many words that are similar, and there are expressions when you translate them into Egyptian Arabic, they make sense. And there are scholars like Professor Amr al-Hawari, who's experimenting with translating texts that have been translated into foreign languages, into many Western languages, translating them into Egyptian Arabic. And he had it performed by actually actors who performed it in Egyptian Arabic, and it makes a lot of sense.
Because the words are close and the concepts are close.
And the expressions.
Now, Egyptians are known for their sense of humor. Did ancient Egyptians have a sense of humor?
Of course, they did have a sense of humor. But
Can you
sometimes
see it in their texts?
you can, and also, but the problem is sometimes the context is lost. If it's a joke that was very ancient Egyptian, you might not get it, but you can sense that it's a joke. They also love to play with words, and even in their sculpture. There's a statue of Ramses II in the Egyptian Museum that's very famous, of him as a child under a falcon.
Okay.
And he has his finger in his mouth. That's how you identify children in ancient, with a side lock of like a side ponytail.
Yeah.
This is children in ancient Egypt were depicted naked with their finger in their mouth and a side ponytail. So we know it's Ramses II as a child. The statue spells out the name of the king. So it's for example, he has a sun disk on his head, which is Ra. A child in ancient Egyptian is Mes. And he's holding a plant, and the hieroglyph for this plant is Su. So Ra Mesu. It's the statue itself spells out the name of the king.
Wow.
So they had all these. They love to play with words.
They played with structures to say the word without writing it.
Yes, exactly.
They were geniuses.
They were very, very, very intelligent people.
Now, who wrote literature in ancient Egypt?
Scribes. So when you think of ancient Egypt, you said that they were very intelligent people, but they were human. They were not men from Mars or you know.
No aliens?
No aliens, unfortunately, for some people. But they were human, and they were ahead of their time. But like any ancient society, the percentage of literacy was very low. So the people who could read and write, there weren't many people who could read and write. And that's why when you go to a museum and you see all these statues of men sitting cross-legged, it's a statue of the person as a scribe or a writer, because this was something you were very proud of and you wanted to have in the afterlife, to continue to have this very valuable skill of writing. So scribes, a lot of the texts that were found in Dir al-Medina were actually practice texts. They were
like
practicing
people who are learning from scribes doing homework.
Yes, and you
found homework sheets.
Yes, ostraca. Ostraca are fragments of limestone or pottery that are broken, and the fragments that they use to write or sketch. And scholars can tell if a text is a practice text, because you can see a lot of spelling mistakes, a lot of errors in the text.
So you could tell that this is someone who is still learning,
Yeah.
not a professional scribe.
And there are many texts that were classics that you find many versions of the same text, because it's a classic that people who are learning to be scribes write.
It's like when we were in primary school, when they used to give us the lesson and ask us to write it 30 times to memorize.
Yeah, exactly.
So they did that on fragments of pottery.
Yeah.
Wow. So we do have still have some roots that are still going on until today.
Exactly. And actually, this is not writing, but some of the ostraca have drawings. And it's also the artists practicing their drawing. before they actually draw them on the tombs, on the tomb walls. So they're practicing, and some of them are not really practiced for their tomb drawings. They're more like inside jokes or like caricatures, experimentation where they're representing the human figure differently from what we're used to in ancient Egyptian drawing. So it's this material is so rich, and you learn so much about ancient Egypt by looking at the writing and the drawing.
Of course, apart from the formal image that you see in the completed temple of a great king. When you go to the back door to the life of an ordinary person who was an artist, you can grasp much more about their life, the real life of every day, other than the polished image or the propaganda of the monument.
That's
Wow.
why Dir el-Medina is such a fascinating site, because you learn about the people. But unfortunately, it's not a very representative site, because most of the people who lived there were skilled, they were literate, which is not representative of the entire Egyptian population.
Course.
So it was a special kind of community.
Yes, it was a closed community that had a function, that had a mission to do.
Exactly.
And everything in their atmosphere, in their surroundings, had to do with their identity, their job, and their mission.
Very true.
But it could still tell you a lot about their life.
Yes, a lot.
So was it only scribes who had this privilege of writing texts?
Anyone who could write was a scribe. So it's a term that's used for anyone who could write.
Okay, so it's not a job.
It's a job, but if you could write, part of your mission was
to work
to be
as a scribe. Okay, so here we are talking about a skill that once you have, you acquire a special status in community.
Yes, very true.
Okay, and what about priests and kings? Because we have writings of kings as well.
It's the writings of kings is of course kings could read and write, but the writings that we have were not writings that we know they produced themselves.
By themselves.
It's something that's royal propaganda that's in temples and tombs and stele that it's mostly royal propaganda or religious texts.
Okay, so it was not them really who wrote.
No, unless not physically them who wrote, but there are, for example, during there are letters known as the Amarna letters, where you have letters between the king of Egypt and other kings in the area, because that was so these letters were probably contained the content of these letters was of course produced by the king.
The Amarna has always been an exceptional period in everything, especially when it has to do with intellect, because it's a time of shift of belief, shift of philosophy, shift of thought, and this has to take us to literature as well.
During Akhenaten, there were hymns that were written to the Aten, and they're very interesting because they're so similar to our monotheistic religions in their content. They talk about the one God and how the one God controls everything and he gives life to everything, and they're so similar to the monotheistic religions, because during Akhenaten what he did was he abolished Amun and the other gods, and the Aten became the all-powerful God who controlled everything. So you can see that in the literature, of course.
And who had access to literature? Was it the students of the scribes only?
Literature, of course, to have access to literature, it was people who were literate, who could read and write.
Yeah.
The content of these texts, if it's a tale, it could have come out of an oral tradition, so it could be the content, the story itself is something that the people, even if they could not read and write, that they could enjoy and were familiar with. But
like folk tales that we still have in Upper Egypt that are
passed on
from one generation to another only orally.
Yes, exactly.
And sung as well.
Yeah. The love songs, we don't know, some say love poetry or love songs. If they were sung, they were probably also something that was people were familiar with. And the hymns and religious texts may have been something that, there was that were recited orally as well.
But what's the genre that reveals most about the Egyptians of all literature?
All of them reveal something. Love songs reveal something about the relationships between men and women and the standards of beauty and things like that.
Well, tell us about that. What were the standards back then?
Well, it says one love song says he's describing her and he's saying narrow of waist, heavy of thighs. So she's curvaceous,
okay.
A curvy woman. There's a duet between a man and a woman, and she says that my mother will not let me go see him, and it says something about that it wasn't that easy for her to go see the man she loves, and it wasn't that open as one would think. Also, the wisdom texts tell you a lot about their moral values. The Book of the Dead, for example, the negative confessions especially tell you a lot about their moral values, because it says the negative confessions, the dead is supposed to say, I did not kill, I did not steal, I did not pollute the Nile, I did not take bread from an orphan, things like that tell you about their moral values. What's considered
the set of values that would show that you're a good person.
Yes. Stories tell you a lot. The tales tell you a lot as well. So everything reveals something. Every piece of writing reveals something about this society.
Speaking of stories and tales, the story of Senuhi has such an importance in literature in ancient Egypt. Mm-hmm. Why has it taken that place?
It's a great literary piece, and it also says a lot about how an Egyptian feels when he's out of his country in exile, living in a foreign land, and his love for his country and his desire to be buried in his country.
Back then in ancient Egypt, people were homesick as well.
Yes.
I'll tell you something, because I have worked with so many people from different countries, and I was abroad. And I have never seen anybody as homesick as Egyptians. Uh-huh. Even if they decide to spend the rest of their life abroad, they would plan to buy a grave and be buried back in their country. Mm-hmm. So apparently this had roots in ancient Egypt as well.
Yes, very true.
Okay, so Senuhi, or the story of Senuhi, is about loving your country or longing for your homeland. But there's another text that has another type of importance. Mm-hmm. It's the Westcar Papyri, right? The Westcar Papyrus. Yeah. So what is the highlight of the Westcar Papyrus?
The Westcar Papyrus is very interesting because it was composed in the Hyksos period, but it tells the story of Khufu, which was much earlier. So Khufu was long dead by the time the Westcar Papyrus was written. Egyptologists have been trying to extract information about Khufu from this papyrus, but it's probably not a very accurate rendition of Khufu, because it was written a long time after he died. But it's also interesting the way it's written is a story within a story, which predates by far Arabian Nights.
It is quite advanced.
Yes, that you have a story within a story. So the structure of it is very interesting.
So what's the key theme to it?
It's Khufu and his sons, and they're telling him stories about magicians, and one of them is about a magician who is capable of reattaching a severed head. So if somebody's decapitated, he can rejoin the head to the person. When Khufu asked them to bring a prisoner so that the magician can rejoin the head to the body, the magician said, "No, I cannot do this to a person," out of principle.
Okay.
He got the magician a goose, and the goose was decapitated, and the head was joined to the body by the magician. So there are several stories like this. It's an interesting...
It is.
But unfortunately, a lot is lost when it's translated, I'm sure. I'm sure there are many things that the ancient Egyptians would have appreciated more than modern readers.
Of course. If you don't have knowledge of the language, if you don't read it firsthand,
yes,
you would definitely lose some of its beauty, of the abilities of the writer. You wouldn't know if he's an able writer.
Yeah. And even, Egyptologists also, they can tell if the handwriting is beautiful or not. Some handwriting is really, really beautiful.
Well, I couldn't really tell the difference.
Yeah.
I mean, so you can notice differences and see that there's a handwriting that's beautiful. And
yeah.
Okay.
And as you know, the ancient Egyptians had different types of writing.
Yes.
So, because people always say, do you speak hieroglyphs? You don't speak hieroglyphs. Hieroglyphs...
It's not spoken.
It's a writing, and it's a script. You speak ancient Egyptian. The language is ancient Egyptian, but it's written in different scripts. So hieroglyphs is what you have on monuments usually. So it's considered the words of God. It's a sacred script. It's written on temples and monuments, and it's meant to last forever.
So you don't see hieroglyphs in papyri or on...
Usually not.
No, they're only for temples and tombs.
Usually, yes. What's on papyri is usually it's hieratic and demotic.
Mm-hmm.
And hieratic is a cursive version of hieroglyphs. So...
Connected.
Yes. And when it's like shorthand hieroglyphs. But what's interesting is that when I studied hieratic, I learned hieroglyphs first. And to me, it makes sense because you learn hieroglyphs and the hieratic is like the shorthand hieroglyphs. But in ancient Egypt, it's the other way around.
How's that?
They learn hieratic first, and then they learn hieroglyphs. Hieroglyphs are like very sacred and it's
like it's the advanced level.
Yeah.
You're not going to start with that.
No, you start with hieratic, which is, to me, is strange.
What kind of texts were written in hieratic and what kind of texts in demotic?
Demotic was used later than hieratic. And demotic is an even more cursive version. It's very difficult. It's a very difficult script to learn. But it was used mostly for daily life texts.
It's not going to be used in a formal document? It's not going to be used in a religious text?
No. It's usually daily life texts.
You were speaking with me about the tiny details in the language that have similarity with Arabic and Egyptian Arabic. But you were mentioning something about the combination of sounds that make only one letter, right?
The ancient Egyptian, and actually that was one of the obstacles when it came to deciphering hieroglyphs, is that when people were trying to decipher the script, some thought it was alphabetic, and some thought it was that each symbol represented a word. But it's a combination. It's there are letters, more like the alphabet, and there are these are called uniliteral signs. So each sign represents one sound, like B or T. That's only one sound. And then you have biliteral signs, which you have each sign represents two sounds. So you have per, which is the word for house, but it's also the sound per, P and R. So you can put it in the middle of a word, and you use it for the sound, or you can use it as
a word of its own.
The symbol for house, the word for house.
But that would be very confusing when you are trying to translate a text, because would you know, or how would you know that this is a separate word that means house, or it's just the per sound inside a word?
They give you clues. If you're using per as a house, you put a stroke afterwards. A line that says this is the word. There are also triliteral sounds. So you have nefer, is N, F, and R together. And
so nefer as a whole is one letter?
Yes.
Or one sign?
Yes. But it can also mean beauty.
That's right.
So the thing is, nefer could be the name of a man.
A man?
Yeah.
Okay, we haven't come across that. We know Nefertari and Nefertiti.
No. For a woman, it's Nofret. Or Nefertiti, it's like the beautiful one has arrived or has come. But
Okay.
Nofret is the female version of Nefer.
Of Nefer.
Nefer. If you're using Nefer as the name of a man, you put a determinative at the end, which is a seated man. That tells you that this is the name of a man. If it's Nofret, you put the seated woman at the end to show that this is. So you're using it as the word as the name of a person, not as an adjective.
So there are sorts of keys to the text that you have to take notice of before you start deciphering what's written.
Yeah. And another thing that complicates matters, that you don't have the word split. It's all, when you look at hieroglyphs, it's all one line.
One line. No space.
No space. So you tell from the determinatives, or how,
Because you know how a sentence is built.
Yeah.
You can tell where it starts and where it ends. Okay, that's difficult.
It is.
and the script is not written only in one direction as well.
Exactly.
Which is even more confusing.
Yes. But you can tell from, for example, if you're looking at the letter Aleph, it's a vulture.
Okay.
You look at, you read by, the direction by looking at the face of
the vulture.
So if the vulture is facing right, you read from right to left. So
the beak is like an arrow that tells you where to start.
Yeah, and also if it's anything that has a face,
yes,
you start by looking at the face and reading.
Speaking of faces and names, there are two names of deities or gods that are related to literature, considered as the guardians or inspirers of literature. Tuhut and Seshat.
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
Why these two specifically?
Thoth is the god of writing and wisdom, and he's actually the one who writes when the dead, his or her heart is weighed against the feather of the goddess of truth and justice, Ma'at. He's the one who's writing the verdict. And Seshat is actually Sesh means writing. Seshat is the goddess of writing and record keeping.
What was the status of women when it comes to literacy at that time?
This is a very good question. We're almost certain that women were not as educated as men. More men were educated than women. But there are examples of, for example, in tombs of women where you have a woman seated, and underneath her there is a scribal palette. And there are scholars who are now criticizing old scholarship because there are scholars in the past who interpreted that this woman was a makeup artist. Or that women can not write, so the palette was probably used for makeup, not for writing. But now more scholars are thinking we should rethink these interpretations, and why are we assuming that she was not an actual scribe? Another thing that complicates matters is that you have letters and texts that were written in the name of women, but we don't know if the woman dictated it but couldn't actually write, or if she could. So understanding what percentage of women could read and write, we're pretty sure that there were women who could read and write, but it was probably much, much less than men.
And there are no names of female scribes that have been mentioned in scripts.
No, and you don't have
that
women...
we have found so far. Maybe we'll find later. We don't know.
Yeah, and you don't have women represented as scribes, and there are, of course, probably you will have women who ruled. We're sure that they could read and write, like Hatshepsut, for example. Sure. But these were exceptional women.
When was the time that literature flourished in ancient Egypt?
The Middle Kingdom is known as the golden age of literature and writing. And the language, Middle Egyptian, when I studied ancient Egyptian, I started with Middle Egyptian. Middle Egyptian is the classic form of the language. It's like, it's the best and the highest standard of ancient Egyptian language. So that was the golden age of literature.
I thought you would say the New Kingdom, which was like the golden era, where it's the age of the empire, the era of the empire. So I thought by association literature would thrive as well. But the Middle Kingdom, we need to stop here. What makes it the time when literature flourished?
The Middle Kingdom was also a period of prosperity and great innovation, and it came after the first intermediate period, and there were many changes happening at that time. The New Kingdom also was a great time for literature, and you have new genres emerging, like the love poetry, for example. But unfortunately, also, you don't know if the love poetry didn't exist in the Middle Kingdom, because it could have been an accident of preservation. The problem with archaeology is that what we know is what actually was found and what was preserved. Many papyri were destroyed, thousands and millions, probably lots of papyri were destroyed through the ages. Yeah, so what we have is a fraction of what existed.
Of course. But at least what's left would give us a clue on what it was like.
Yeah.
Now, we spoke about the time of flourish, but there's also in the intermediate periods a time of demise, a time of dark periods.
Yes.
You would call them. So, what was it like in that time of demise, of the collapse of kingdom?
You have literature, but it's more pessimistic. And you have, for example, also what are known as the Harper's songs. There's a song...
Is this the suicide text?
No, not yet. But I'll tell you about the suicide text.
Yeah, because I can't wait.
Yeah, the Harper's songs are songs that were sung in funerary context. And one of them was found in a papyrus, written in a papyrus, but it says that it comes from a tomb of King Intef. And Intef was a king of the second intermediate period. There were many kings called Intef, so we don't know which one. But this one is interesting because it speaks about how you should enjoy life, and life is better than death, and you should enjoy life while it lasts. And it gives you it has this skepticism about life after death, and it's different. So the story that you're talking about, the dispute between a man and his ba.
Yeah, I think this is the oldest suicidal note found in history, was ancient Egyptian.
Yeah, it's kind of debatable. Some people say it's not necessarily a suicide text. It's about, it was the version we have it was probably from the reign of Amenemhat III, but there could have been earlier versions, so it may have come from the intermediate period. But it's interesting because it's a man debating with his ba, which is loosely translated as soul, because there were different aspects of the soul. And he talks about death, and his soul tells him death is not good, and life is you should enjoy life, and life is beautiful, and death is not a good thing. People scholars have interpreted it as someone who wants to commit suicide, and his soul is dissuading him and arguing why life is much better than death. But it's and some have interpreted it as someone who's just it's like an internal struggle between, is life worth living, is it good, and then it's not necessarily a suicide.
Like
about suicide.
Maybe it's not a suicide note in the sense that we know today, but it's that kind of struggle of what's the point of living.
Exactly, it's dark.
and it's quite surprising.
Yeah.
At that time, thousands of years ago, I mean, you would think the idea of existentialism or thinking of life as absurd and nothingness is something, or is a symptom of the complications of modern life.
Yeah.
When you have lots of pressures around you, like the social pressures, the psychological pressures, the so many burdens that modern life has brought to you. But when you go back thousands of years and you find that very same struggle and this existential crisis, you would start to think, okay, maybe it's not modern life. Maybe it's in human nature anyway.
There were many pressures in ancient times as well. This is reflected in the literature. And what's beautiful about ancient Egyptian literature is that it shows you how much we have in common with ancient people, that they're not very different from us, and that human beings are human beings, and they have the same emotions, they have the same fears, they have the same internal struggles, and that's a problem that I see when people about how we think of ancient Egypt. We always talk about the pyramids and Tutankhamun and the gold, and we forget that there were human beings behind all of this, and that these human beings were very much like ourselves.
That's why we wanted to know the feelings of those people. We want to be in their shoes through their texts, and that's why I was so curious when you told me that inside the homes of ordinary people in Deir el-Medina, you found scripts, or archaeologists found texts that can tell you about the daily life.
Not inside the homes. A lot of the texts were found in a pit that was dug north of the village, and that they dug it as a well to find water, but when they couldn't reach the water, they used it as a dump. So it contained the garbage of the village. So imagine, like, in modern days where you write something and you throw it away. So there
like
are all these
old paper of studying and
So it produced so much, this pit.
Wow.
And when you go to Deir el-Medina, because you can visit it today, and I'm sure many people haven't, but it's worth visiting.
Definitely.
you can see the houses. Of course, you don't have the whole house. You have like the foundations of the house, but you can see how close the houses were, and you can imagine, these people lived so close to each other, and probably overheard other people, their neighbors' conversations, and it's fascinating.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And you could tell the layout of the house and see how many rooms it consisted
Yes.
of, and
There was probably a lot of gossip going on in that village.
I bet.
The men used to spend most of their time actually away from the homes, and it was the women who spent most of their time in the village, because the men during the week they would go to the Valley of the Kings, and between Deir el-Medina and the valley on the hill there were huts where they probably spent their nights and then went to work in the valley
So they
instead
would-
of going back home, and they would go home during the weekend.
All right. Okay. So they had like temporary lodging spaces
Yeah.
close to their work,
Yes.
and they would go home in the weekend.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. That's very interesting. Now, what does the Nile have to do with literature? What is the relation between the Nile and literature?
Well, the Nile was the source of everything. Actually, the ancient Egyptians understood the value of the Nile, and that a low Nile would create a shortage in food and a lot of problems for them. And it was very visible in their literature, the how they valued the Nile, even in the negative confessions, where you have a confession that I did not pollute the Nile. So it was very visible in the literature.
It was a sin to pollute the Nile.
Yes, exactly. And it's also the source of papyrus, which was used as writing material, as paper in ancient Egypt. So
Okay.
the Nile was very important. The way they viewed the world was very influenced by the Nile, because for them, the word for Egypt, black land, is the
Kemet.
fertile Kemet, the fertile land by the Nile, and Deshret, desert, is the red land, the desert area. So they saw everything in the black land and the red land, Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. There was always this division.
They had this clear map
Yes.
of what Egypt is and the description
Yeah.
that matched that.
Yes.
And Deshret is desert.
Yes.
Very close.
Yeah.
Very
Yeah,
close.
yeah.
Wow. So why is the Book of the Dead an important text in literature, although it's strictly religious?
Because it's actually a series of spells that enable the dead to pass on to live eternally in the afterlife. And of course, there's the negative confessions that I told you about. That's from the Book of the Dead, that gives you a lot of information about the moral values of the ancient Egyptians. And there were many different versions of the Book of the Dead. And the Book of the Dead, the negative confessions changed from one to the other, also probably a little bit dependent on the person for whom it was written.
Now that we have come across different types of or different genres of literature, what can we today learn from the literature of ancient Egypt?
It teaches you empathy, to understand that humans are humans in whatever age or place. Their human nature doesn't change. And as an Egyptologist, I try to always empathize with the ancient Egyptians and put myself in their shoes and try to understand where they're coming from. And I think that's something very important when it comes to ancient Egyptian literature. Of course, as an Egyptologist, I learned so much about the people from what they left behind. And as a person, it made me feel that, admire writers and think that, prioritize writing a book, because I want to immortalize myself like the ancient Egyptians did.
Because the word is your legacy.
Exactly. But one thing I want to add, what's interesting and unfortunate is that many of the texts have no author. So you don't know the name of the person who wrote the text.
Yes,
It's rare to find the name of the person. Just like in the art of ancient Egypt, you don't find the name of, they don't sign their art.
Okay, so there are no famous writers in ancient Egypt, or...
There were names of wise people that we know from ancient Egypt who probably had words of wisdom that were written but as...
who are the most prominent names?
No, like Imhotep, for example, was worshipped, he was the architect who built the Step Pyramid, and he was venerated years after his death, and particularly in the late period, and long after his death, as a wise man, and not just as he was originally an architect, but he was venerated as a god of medicine and healing as well.
There was no specific specialization for each person as their profession.
There were specializations, but I think this very strict specialization is actually one of the bad things, in my point of view, in modern society. Because in the past, it's not just ancient Egypt. You think of Leonardo da Vinci. There were many polymaths in history. The problem is that now we're increasingly specialized. In the past, you could get a doctor. He or she could come and see you and tell you what's and understand what could be wrong with you. But now, no, this is not my area of specialization. You go to a doctor that's specialized in this. Everyone in Egyptology, and we're very, very specialized. I'm a philologist. I only read texts. I cannot talk about art. So it's a symptom of modern society.
And that is why the very advanced scientists always call for interdisciplinary approach. You have to study different fields and put them together to see from a different perspective, to be able to connect from a different point of view.
But it's not one person who thinks interdisciplinary. That person has to work with another person
network
from another discipline.
Yes.
And that's unfortunate, because I think all sciences and arts are connected. Music is very mathematical.
Of course.
There are many, everything is interconnected actually. All the sciences are connected, all the arts are connected. So I think it's a very negative symptom of modern society that these things are all.
So now we are calling for something that ancient Egyptians had and did thousands of years ago. We're struggling because of the lack of it.
It won't happen. I'm not very optimistic about it.
No?
No. We're going to become even more specialized.
Oh, you think so?
Yeah.
I don't want to end on a pessimistic note.
Well, I don't know. Now we have AI, so I don't know what's going to happen.
That's not very positive to end with either.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Now, give us a line from literature that you think highlights a point of wisdom, or is the core of wisdom that you would go to or hang on your wall.
Be a scribe.
Be a scribe.
Be a scribe. Write. Writing is, I think, very important. It's how you pass on your thoughts, your feelings, and your essence as a human being.
Well, Yasmin, I've enjoyed this so much, and I hope you did too.
I did, very, very much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thank you.